Hello, everybody. Mr. H is here with you. Want a little bit of help here from Heinz the cat. Yep, she's over there assisting us today. And it's time to talk about the early republic. So we've got ourselves a new constitutional government, a new federal government. We have an election in 1788 for chief executive, i.e. a president. Who's our first president? That's a no-brainer. George Washington. Going to win the election, no problem, 1788. Wins the next one, 1792, and no problem. Doesn't take a third term. Why not? Yeah, I mean, he's not a dictator, but I don't know. You get people in power, they tend not to leave they tend not to want to leave. Even George Washington, I get a little bit nervous about having the guy in one place too long. But hey, he's the perfect guy to get it all started. So George Washington, president number one. If you didn't know that, smile, nod, pretend you did the whole time, right? All righty. Time to get this government rolling, man. The Judiciary Act in 1789. Try to get some legal footing here for the Supreme Court. There are a lot of people are worried that federal courts will overrun state courts. Well, that's kind of the idea, right? Well, the first thing they say is, I don't want you passing any ex post facto law. All right, who remembers their Latin? All right, ex post facto. This means it can't be a crime after the fact, right? If it's a crime, not if it's a crime to do the hokey pokey out in the middle of the street, and now it's illegal, and I want to persecute you for what you did before. You can't do that. All right, now it's illegal from this point on. I can't punish you back when it was legal, right? No bills of attainder. Oh my goodness, this is like seizure of property. You can't seize anything without just cause. That's what that is. And of course, at the Constitutional Convention, a lot of people wouldn't sign the Constitution unless they had a Bill of Rights. So they put the Bill of Rights on it, and now everyone is, if not happy, at least reasonably satisfied. And here are the Bill of Rights. Here they are. You know some of them you don't know. Of course, freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, can't quarter soldiers in homes during peacetime unless they declare martial law. Remember that there, the Quartering Act in the British back in the 1760s. Number 4, search and seizure. Got to have a warrant to search and take anything. Number 5, no double jeopardy. You don't have to testify yourself unless you want to. Everybody gets due process of law. If they're going to take your property, they got to give you just compensation for it. Here's number 6, a speedy and public trial. You get to face your accuser. Yes, if I stole your car, you have to look at me and say, I stole your car. Then I said, you got a crappy car. I didn't take it anyway. And you get a lawyer. If you can't afford one, they'll appoint one for you. Usually a guy that got a public defender's office who graduated from law school like 20 minutes ago. All right, you got the 7th Amendment. If the controversy is more than 20 bucks, big money back then, I'll still take 20 bucks. You want to hand it to me. You have to have a right of trial by jury, right? So you got small claims court, and then you got the real thing here. Number 8, no cruel or unusual punishment, right? This is the punishment. You go to jail, public service. We cannot crucify you upside down as much as we like to on occasion. Number 9, don't use the Constitution to disparage or deny other rights. That's called punishment under color of law. Can't use the law to punish somebody. And of course, 10, powers not delegated to the United States by Constitution or prohibited by the states or reserved to the states. In other words, that's your states' rights clause. If the federal government can't do it, maybe the states can. That's always open to a lot of interpretations. Still got a lot of arguments over that. I'll leave the details here to the civics class. Alexander Hamilton, he's our first Secretary of the Treasury. We need money to run the government, so he's selling U.S. bonds to people. You give the U.S. government a little bit of money in a few years, they give it back to you with 4% interest. That means you think the U.S. government's going to be around, so you will get the money back. Also selling land in the West. Yeah, they've been doing that for a while now. Now the federal government gets the money for selling it. Got an excise tax on alcohol and imports because everyone drinks a lot in colonial America, 6 times how much they drink now, and imports. Now, this is a little bit controversial, a small perpetual debt. He says you keep a small debt and you pay it every month to build up a credit rating. Some people weren't happy about it. You get a debt, you pay it off, you move on. But he says keep it going so you build up a record. And he also wants to assume different states' debts. You get a lot of different reactions. Virginia paid off all its debts already. and suddenly Massachusetts gets all its debt paid off by the federal government. Weren't very happy about it, but what you gonna do, federal over state, right? And now he's trying to attract foreign investors, and the main foreign investor he's after is Great Britain. Yeah, the guys who just fought a war with. But hey, that's where most of our trade is with. They're going to try and diversify it out a little bit more. They're starting to look towards the French West Indies. But right now, Britain's your main trading partner. Mention a national bank and everybody loses their mind. Oh, why are they so upset about a national bank for? Well, here's several arguments. Corruption. We know what happens when the banks get too much money. Concentrated economic power, and they become corrupt. They start breaking the law. They try to hide breaking the law. The money starts disappearing. Yeah, 2008 all over again. Some people say it's unconstitutional. Hamilton says, look at Article 1, Section 8. Do it. It basically comes down to do whatever you need to do to make the country operate. And a lot of other people say it's extremely divisive. Some people like the idea of a national bank to coordinate everything. Other people don't like it because, like I said, concentrated economic power might not even be constitutional. All this stuff down here is very true, but I got a better graph set up a little bit later on. Meanwhile, we got the Whiskey Rebellion. Happens over in western PA near Pittsburgh. They like to make their whiskey. They like to sell their whiskey. They do not like paying taxes on their whiskey. Well, they had some tax collectors go look for the money. They got tarred and feathered and treated rather rudely. So, looks like we got ourselves a rebellion, and here we go. Testing of the new federal government. George Washington gets on a horse and leads soldiers into Pittsburgh to put down the rebellion. Well, they had 2 people arrested already and sentenced them to death. George Washington declares martial law and overturns the sentences. Why? Because one man is a simpleton and the other one's insane. In other words, he let everybody off the hook. He says, start the tax thing over again, reduce the rate of taxes, and don't make me come over here again. Thank you. So, the federal government has avoided another Shays Rebellion. Don't worry about that. Now, what we're starting to see is a division, beginning of partisan politics, between Federalist and Anti-Federalist. Federalists who want a strong central government, and Anti-Federalist, which is kind of bad marketing, to be honest with you. You should call it something else that's kind of negative when you start with the word anti, but nonetheless, Anti-Federalist, eventually known as Republican Democrat or just plain Democrats, who want a weaker sort of central government. They both want a central government, but, what kind of central government do we want? Federalists want a strong one. They tend to be concentrated in the north. The anti-federalists tend to be concentrated in the south. Why is this? I think it has something to do with geography. In the north, some of these cities are a little bit closer together. Boston and Philly only 90 miles away from each other. New York and Boston not too far off, Whereas in the south, things are spread out a lot more. It takes a while between Charleston to Atlanta and Savannah. So maybe it's easier to organize stuff because when the cities are closer, whereas if it's more spread out, it's not that well organized. The Federalists believe in a loose interpretation of the Constitution. There's nothing in the Constitution about a national bank, but it seems to be a really good idea and it puts the country forward. In the South, it's a strict constructionalist view. If it's not in the Constitution, don't do it. Plus, North tends to be somewhat more commercial and starting to industrialize. The South tends to be more agricultural. And there's one thing farmers hate. They hate the bank. They're always foreclosing on farms. That's another reason the South tends to be against the bank, an anti-federalist. Any kind of concentration of power, economic or political, they don't like it. In the North, more pro-bank because, like we said, more commercial, more industrial. There's loans and stuff going out, so it tends to be a little bit more pro-bank. When it comes to foreign policy, anti-federalists have kind of a French tilt, whereas the federalists tilt towards the British. Again, it comes to geography. The North, who's the main trading partner, is going to be Britain, right? It's industrialized and commercial. In the South, it's kind of agricultural. They'll trade with anybody, but a lot of their trade's headed towards the French West Indies because it's actually closer. Charleston, Savannah, you can sail to the West Indies a little bit easier, whereas Philly, Boston, New York, it's easier to get to New York. Easier to go to Great Britain. Federalists, sometimes they call them Feds. Anti-Federalists, they change their name up. Republican-Democrats, sometimes you just call them Democrats. Some people in the Democratic Party claim this is what their party's based on. I think it's more Andrew Jackson, but whatever. Whoever's got the best donuts at the meeting, right? Good thing to know this, by the way. Essay. All right, here's America. We went through this map one time before. We've got stable boundaries. Here's the Mississippi. Over here is the Atlantic. Spain's getting obnoxious about trying to grab some territory to save New Orleans. We've got a little bit of dispute up here with the British in Maine, a dispute way out here in the middle of nowhere, which will be Minnesota one day. We also know about the secret treaty between, France and Spain here about this Louisiana thing. We know the French are going to get it back in 1800. Down here is Haiti. That's going to be important. French West Indies. Great Britain way over this way. In Haiti, we've got a revolution, 1791. Well, the French Revolution broke loose in 1789, overthrow the absolute monarchy of Louis XVI, inspired in part by the United States, because, a lot of French soldiers were fighting over here during the Revolution, brought the ideas back. Haiti is inspired because it's a French colony, and slave revolt begins because of horrible working conditions, and they overthrow the government. Why this is important to America? It's important to the southern part of America because they still have slaves and they don't want this idea spreading around. It's going to anyway. Deal with Indians in the southeast. Well, the federal government tries to tackle this, the new federal government. Dealing with the Creek, the Choctaw, and the Cherokee down in the southeast. Seminoles down in Florida could be a problem. Got to try and chase them in the swamp, and you know what? It's not easy chasing people in the swamp. Got the Treaty of New York in 1790 where they give the Creek Nation the authority to punish trespassers, even though they try to give back slaves or run away, and non-Indian crimes are going to be tried in the U.S. courts. But as you can see, they start just gradually taking territory away from Native Americans, and it just starts the precedent where the Native Americans make a treaty with the federal government, and the federal government ends up lying all the time. They're trying to push them out of here because later on you're going to have the big cotton plantations over here. So you need to get people off the land, and they're doing it by ways that are not exactly ethical. Yeah, wait till you get the Trail of Tears. So U.S. Native American relations are not very good, especially up in the Northwest as well. We saw the Southeast, up in the Northwest. Remember I thought about militia battles out there, and they send troops out there and they lose all the time? 1790, the Shawnee and the Seneca in Ohio smash down an army. Barry St. Clair sends an army in the exact same place and loses the following year. The Battle of Fallen Timbers. Mad Anthony Wayne defeats these people and forces them to sign a Treaty of Greenville in 1794. This is how he ended up gaining most of Ohio. Now, the British have been occupying forts out there since 1783. The treaty to end the Revolutionary War had stipulated the British would abandon Western forts at their earliest convenience, and for some reason they can't seem to find speed convenient. It's been 11 years since the end of the war, They've been handing weapons off to these Indians. They've been starting all kinds of battles. We're very mad at the British, we can't really fight them quite yet. This is why anti-federalists don't like the British very much. And the Treaty of Greenville, when we finally get control of Ohio, starts to scare the British into leaving. Thank you. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Now we have to start dealing with other countries. We got Pinckney's Treaty. Now, Spain is terrified of some sort of British-American alliance. Why? I don't know. Maybe because they have good commercial relations. Maybe now the British are finally leaving the forts in the Northwest. Well, they're terrified that they're going to storm New Orleans one day. Because we ship stuff down the Mississippi, but since New Orleans is at the mouth of it, you have to pay a tax to get it out of there. Right? So Spain figures maybe it's not a good idea to push these Americans too far because they might go crazy and grab New Orleans one day. So they decide to stop the disputed territory north of Florida. All right, we'll give that to the Americans. U.S. gets free navigation on the Mississippi, so you can sail up and down, and Spanish won't search your ships. And 3-year right of deposit in New Orleans because now you can drop stuff off in New Orleans and not have to pay a tax on it. Why 3 years? Because they know it's going back to France, right, in 1800. Now we got Jay's Treaty coming up, and people weren't very happy. Nope, they were very upset about this treaty, but we did the best we could with what we had. Now, the French Revolution's broken loose over in Europe. Some people say we should help the French because they helped us out, but to be honest with you, what can we do? There's nothing we can do. Drop the whole U.S. Army in the middle of Battle of Waterloo, and no one's going to know it was there. And they're blockading each other, the French and the British. So we send stuff to France, the ships get jumped. We send stuff to Britain. Sometimes the French can jump it, most of the time they get through. But the British are the worst offenders. They're damaging ships. They even sank a couple. They'll stop the ship and take stuff off. So Jay's Treaty, they said they would pay for damages for American ships seized, and sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they didn't. So we got the British to withdraw from the Northwest Post. They finally did. Remember, we spoke about that. And we could trade with the British as most favored nation. That means, hey, we don't have to we don't have to pay taxes in British ports. And of course, we talked about Spain already. This stuff was happening all at the same time. Now we're trying to speak to the French, and like I said, one party, the anti-federalists, see the French as natural allies, but for some reason the French don't really treat us with a lot of respect. So we're supposed to meet the French about them jumping some of our ships. So I send 3 delegates over, and we're supposed to meet their Secretary of State, which they call a foreign minister. And instead of going in to see Talleyrand, they tell us to say, give us $250,000, we'll let you go see him. And we were very upset about this. We called it the XYZ affair. 3 officials, call them X, Y, and Z. And we're very upset because we want to talk to somebody we're going to talk to. You don't have to bribe somebody to go talk to somebody to talk about trade. Millions for defense, not 1 cent for tribute. We'll talk more about that later. So American and French ships occasionally shoot at each other. Now we got the Barbary pirates showing up. We'll get to them later. 1796, right? George Washington decides he's not going for a 3rd term. We got John Adams, who's a Federalist, going up against Thomas Jefferson, anti-Federalist. Adams is going to win. Now, the Constitution was originally set up with this insane belief that patriotism would trump partisanism. It doesn't. John Adams wins, and here's the number 2 guy, Jefferson, so he gets to be vice president. So you got 2 guys with radically different beliefs in the White House. Could you imagine if Trump and Clinton were in the White House today? Yeah, they're going to change that later, but 1796, you got to put up with this. And in 1800, they're going to have a rematch, so the vice president running against the president. Yeah, we still got some things to iron out here with this Constitution. Got the Alien and Sedition Acts. So we get very paranoid because the French and the British fighting each other and jumping ships. So they start to pass legislation that allows the federal government to deport spies. We also have the Alien Friends Act. They can expel people without due process. People say this would happen. You put the Federalists in charge. We got the nationalization law, 5 years to 14 years, then you become a citizen. Why 14? I'll be honest with you, I'm not completely sure. I guess paperwork moved even slower back then. My dad came to this country, got to be a citizen in 5 years. Not sure what the 14 is all about. And then the Sedition Act punished those encouraging disobedience of federal law or preaching for the violent overthrow of the United States government. Sometimes the law isn't right, though. Remember Rosa Parks? Yeah, stuff like that. Sometimes people protest because the law is wrong. Are you going to punish somebody when they eventually end up right? Yeah, kind of a gray area there. Now, this is not a gray area. You cannot advocate the violent overthrow of the United States government. I think everybody agrees on that, even though every April 15th I start to think in that direction. Weirdly enough, you could actually advocate for the peaceful overthrow of it. Yeah, completely legal. We do it every 4 years. It's called an election. Nonetheless, all of this stuff has Federalist support, Republican Democratic opposition, or anti-Federalist if you like, because all this stuff strengthens the government. And they think it might lead to a dictatorship somewhere down the road. So this leads to the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. They're written anonymously by James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. If it was, how come we know they wrote them? Both in Virginia. I guess they match up the handwriting there with the Declaration of Independence, right? They declare that states can nullify federal legislation to say a threat to the rights of their citizens. Yeah, I don't really know about that because what's the point having a federal government over the state government? Of course, their argument is if the federal government becomes tyrannical, the states need to take it down. So this is the beginning of states' rights, and this is an argument that has gone on since the beginning. They also started building up the army, and the Democrats were terrified that maybe this was turning into a military dictatorship. Spoiler alert, no, it's not. We need to fight Indians, and they're not very good at it. Election of 1800, we got the rematch between Jefferson and Adams. I put this down because the Steelers and Cowboys have played in 3 Super Bowls. Plus, I don't like the Cowboys. I enjoy seeing them getting clotheslined, their head nearly ripped off. The election of 1800 is the most important election in American history. Why is this so important? Okay, you don't need to know these details, though it's nice to know. It's a close election. It's a tight election. It's a disputed election. Look at this, 15% voter turnout. Now 40 people are starting to get interested. Jefferson and Burr end up in a tie. Wow. So they have to go to the House of Representatives to break the tie. And of course, the partisanship sets in, right? And at the end of the day, we have a disputed election. Not sure really who won. And nothing happens. That's the important thing. Nothing happens. Do you know how rare that is in today's world? Do you know 35 heads of state out of 179 countries last time I checked? Only 35 go to bed and wake up in the same bed in the morning? Yeah, they have disputes over election. The army starts marching. There's rioting. Election of 1800 is disputed. Takes a long time to figure out who won. Jefferson. And at the end of the day, nothing happens. The Federalists hand over to Jefferson, and nothing happened. A change between parties, a transfer of power, peaceful transfer of power. That's what makes democracy run. That's very rare in today's world. That's what makes this country so great. It's a stable government. It's a stupid government. It's an inefficient government. And half the time the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. But at least it's stable. We'll have to give it that. Kind of like a refrigerator trying to move. It just doesn't move. We've got some other problems, though. Fugitive slave law. This tells you everything you need to know about the slave problem that's starting to eat away at America. The fugitive slave law is a federal law. If a slave escapes, it has to be returned to the guy who used to own this person. So you got professional slave catchers out there. There's no trial because a slave isn't a citizen. It's regarded as a property, and a human being is not property. And a lot of people say this, and they're starting to get upset about this. Pennsylvania and Massachusetts refuse to enforce this law. They say it's not property. It's not an it. It's a he or she. Can't do this. But hey, I thought it's a federal law. You have to follow it. And these are northern states who should be federalists, but they're saying I'm not passing this thing. So you start to wonder, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to punish them? But then again, it's not property. This is a human being. See that big gray zone? Becoming a problem. And then Gabriel's rebellion in 1800 near Richmond, Virginia. The South was terrified, thinking this is another Haiti. Remember 1791? So now militias are turning into secret police almost, watching the slaves all the time. Some people in the South are even wondering, do we really need the slavery stuff? Because it seems to be, more of a problem than it should. Newsflash, you want people to work for you and work hard. I don't know, pay them maybe? I don't know, just an opinion. Well, Gabriel had been taught to read and write. He's actually got along great with his with the people who owned him, and then he had visions of God said kill everybody, and they went bonkers and killed a lot of people, but the rebellion didn't go very far. And when he was up on the stand before they hung him, he said, "I have nothing more to offer than what General Washington would have had to offer had he been taken by British officers." Yeah, so he has a pretty good idea what's going on, but like I said, everyone's terrified of another Haiti. But some people are starting to think maybe it's time to get rid of the slavery thing. Even people in the South are starting to wonder. This might be more trouble than it's worth. And we actually have evidence that slavery may be dying before 1800. All right, it's not conclusive because our census in 1790 didn't really have standardized forms. But there appear to be a decline in the number of slave owners in the South. So maybe it's starting to decline. And then in 1793, Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin. Eli Whitney, a man who hated slavery from Massachusetts, a state that can't stand slavery, invents the cotton gin, which gives slavery new life. Oh, you talk about throwing a rock in the pond and not knowing where the ripples go. If he'd known this, he probably would have thrown that thing in the river. One slave could clean 1 pound of cotton, picking out all the seeds in about a day. With this thing, they could clean 7 or 8. And so now if you got more slaves, you've got more cotton. And congratulations, Mr. Whitney, you have just given slavery a new life. I'm sure he probably hated thinking about that. Well, slavery is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. It's going to divide North and South, end up having a civil war over it one day. And by the way, Eli Whitney also invented the idea of interchangeable parts. And the first thing you could use interchangeable parts for, rifles. And that's going to play a big part in the Civil War. So Eli Whitney, a man who hated slavery, gives slavery its second life and invents a concept that creates weapons that will kill 620,000 Americans in a war that slavery played a major part in. Great, now I'm completely depressed. I hope you have a better day. I'll see you in just a bit.